Okay, hello. I'm just making a short video for Sid, my colleague at Code Sandbox, because I got an idea after watching his talks on design systems. And yeah, let me like this one. He talks about design systems and how, like, it's a very complex thing, and Code Sandbox is just a perfect fit for his way of thinking, as you need to take some core pieces to get going and then you can kind of like build on it. And he also at the end here is talking about, he has some thoughts on like API and how you can have a theme, and then you can define components, and then you can kind of like translate these definitions into different apps. Meaning, if you're using React with style components or you're just using CSS, you can have this core format that's shared across everything. Yeah, here he started talking about this stuff. So I had some thoughts on how you could actually implement such an API. So, for example, you would have like a theme, and the theme consists of these colors. It has like font sizes. I don't exactly remember the format here, but it doesn't really matter. There is like a suggested format here. So that kind of like defines your theme, but then you also have components. So this is actual elements in the UI, but it doesn't matter how you produce those elements, like what technology you use. You just want a core definition. So, for example, a form would have like font size 2, which points to the font sizes in the theme, as an example. And then like you could do, yeah, whatever. Let's do this simple way. So the question is, how would you then consume this in an app? So at Code Sandbox, we're using style components, and we are using React, of course, since we're using style components. So how could we consume this definition of components and the theme? So the way I imagine this, and this comes from my own experiences in API design, is that we can create a factory. So typically you would import like styled from style components, and then you would like create my form, for example, and that would be styled form, something like that. And then you would start styling stuff. Now, what I'm thinking is that we can actually create our own factory. So instead of using style directly from style components, we could import our theme and components from Code Sandbox UI library, whatever. And then we would also import like create styled API. I'm just coming up with this stuff. But the point here is that what we're going to do is wrap styled with our own theming and components. So the way we would do this is basically export default, create styled API. We pass it styled. And actually, I think this could be like, let's say we are grabbing this locally from UI, whatever. And we would import this from an actually library. Sid's idea library. So the way we would do this is we pass in style, because that's what this factory expects. And we would pass in the components we want to populate. And then we could pass in the theme. Like style components has a provider, but let's just pass in the theme here. So now we have our own thing. So what we can do instead there is import styled from app slash whatever, our style. And this is the wrapped one. So this knows about our components, and with TypeScript and stuff, this will be properly typed, no worries. So instead of doing style.form, you would now have, since we have a form up here, we would now have style.form. And And this would indeed have the font size already set by default. But of course, you would be able to override this with any style you want here, like color red or whatever. But the point is it has that core styling. So we'll probably export that. Yeah, so that's basically like an example of having like a library that allows you to convert this theme format and components format into different consumption types. So in this case, we created a create styled API, but we could do something else. We could do a create CSS API instead. And then we would rather import, what's this, CSS. I think that's a thing in style components. And we would pass in the same stuff. And then instead of styled, we would just have our CSS. And we would, of course, just consume this directly in the code. So if we had a form, we would say class name equals CSS form, for example. Because now when we use this factory, it would return an object where we have all the components as the key, but the value is the CSS string based on all the CSS definitions in the components here. And it could, of course, optimally pre-create CSS classes for each specific font size and stuff like that, so that this form would actually be multiple classes. It would kind of like be, in this case, it would be the class representing the font size of 2. And if you had like color, theme color is red 500, for example, that would also be its own class name. So it would kind of like optimally build the CSS strings. And then we could even do like create class names, something like that. Create class names. And then we wouldn't pass in anything. We would just pass in the components and the theme. And what you would get back here would actually be basically the same thing, but it would only be actual class names, which means that these class names would have to exist somewhere. It needed to be manually imported and exist in the global space, but you would be able to import and set these class names. While with the previous version with CSS, those would actually be imported automatically with your code. Anyways, my idea here is to like have the theme, have the components as like the core building blocks with a defined structure. And then we create these factories for transforming these core structures into consumable parts for different kinds of ways to build elements on your in your apps. So you could have like, well, I don't know. Yeah, like for, I don't know. For example, create CSS API. Could also be used for emotion, for example. The same for style, because they have the same API surface. But the point is to, yeah, be able to support different apps with different technologies. Cool. I think that's it. I just had to put this into a video and show it to you, Sid. And if it doesn't make any sense, well, maybe it inspired to something else. But here's my inspiration from your talks. Thanks. Keep it up.